So it is my great pleasure to introduce Kip Tindell, who's the co-founder and chairman emeritus of the Container Store. And full disclosure, I live in a Brooklyn apartment where I had no closets, and so now I have a closet across the entire wall of my bedroom, thanks to Container Store. Yay! So I have a bias. He is also the co-chairman of Conscious Capitalism. He built his business based on foundational principles, including an employee-first culture. The company has been the Fortune 100 best companies to work for 19 years in a row. And you should read his book, Uncontainable, to get a sense of what he's been working on. I'm doing the promo for you there, Kip. He's received many awards, which I'm not going to read. And now he's really dedicating a lot of his time to thinking through and working with groups that are working on a paradigm shift from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Kip Tindell. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to do that.
All righty. The elbow thing. Well, hello, and thank you, Tanzi. Thank you, Stern. I'm really happy to be here. And we're going to be talking about a lot of my really most passionately felt favorite topics. And I think you've been talking most today about a lot of them. As we all know, in 1970, Milton Friedman said the only reason a corporation exists is to maximize the return of the shareholders. And I guess we're all surprised that that statement seemed to really kind of have more impact than he probably thought that it would. And now we've had 50 years of the remarkable fallout of that statement. And in 1982, the SEC adopted the rule that a company can buy back its own stock. And I always knew that, but in looking at the exact wording of it, to read it, it's Rule 10b-18. It provides for voluntary safe harbor from liability for manipulation for a publicly traded corporation to buy back its own stock as long as it acts in accordance with the rule's manner, timing, price, and volume conditions. So from that wording, you can see how vociferously it was felt that that was really illegal manipulation. And so look how we've evolved in that regard. I think these are probably the two specific events that are most usually pointed to, particularly the United States sort of pendulum swinging from the beginning of, the whole Indian thing and then slavery, but then after we got past kind of the labor wars of the teens and 20s, we had a period in the middle of the century where pretty much a more conscious form of capitalism, pretty much a more stakeholder form of capitalism was practiced. And I always like to talk about a lot of it was practiced kind of like my favorite movie, It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, right here in the US of A in the 40s and the 50s and in the 60s even. And you remember how George Bailey in that movie, I mean, the Bailey's brothers building and loan, when you made a deposit, that money actually went to build the homes of the Bakers or to start the business of the next family. And when the building and loan got in trouble, the community came to support the Baileys. And that's because the Baileys really did support the community. They really supported the culture of the community. They really supported the communities. I mean, you all saw the movie, right? You know what I'm talking about. And that good feeling, that loyalty by the employees, that loyalty by the community existed to, I think, a greater extent during that era than it has now. Now the pendulum swung farther. So, yeah, I think we've gone too far towards more of a shareholder supremacy model. And I use shareholder supremacy rather than shareholder primacy because I think supremacy is a little bit punishing towards it, and deservedly so. The pendulum is beginning to move back now. I feel like we're hitting a tipping point, and I'm really happy to talk about why I think we're hitting a tipping point. As my friend Lady Lynn Rothschild, who has actually started an organization called Inclusive Capitalism that many of you may know about, We need a form of capitalism that's sustainable, inclusive, trusted, and strong. And I think we're beginning to move towards that. At the Container Store, we would always say about the Milton Friedman thing, you know, God, Milton, I know, but I mean, and I know you want a Nobel Prize and everything, but at the Container Store, where we have this employee-first culture, we really and truly believe that if you take better care of the employee than anybody else, she'll actually take better care of the customer than anybody else. And if those two people are something kind of semi-approaching ecstatic, then you know your shareholder's going to be really, really happy too. But if you myopically kind of focus on just the shareholder, the magic's lost, the employee's not happy, the customers aren't happy, and ultimately the shareholder's not happy either. Every employee is somebody's precious child. Bob Chapman, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller, which is a very unsexy manufacturer of tool and die makers and whatnot, at his daughter's wedding, he realized that every employee is somebody's precious child as he was taking her up the aisle. And it was such a big moment for it that it transformed the way he dealt with his employees. He and I spent a lot of time talking about how you go about making sure that people look forward to getting out of bed to coming in the work in the morning. I believe totally that you have a moral obligation, if you're lucky enough to be somebody's employer, to do what it takes to make sure they do want to get out of bed and come to work in the morning. And where that leads you in the case of Bob Chapman is he buys kind of rundown Rust Belt tool and die making companies where the employees are just completely disengaged, just completely unhappy. He buys them for pennies on the dollar. And in as little as 1 year, year and a half, he transforms them by really kind of taking care of the Maslow's hierarchy of need of those employees. Those employees are beaten down by work every day, and he begins to uplift them at work every day. And he's made more money than just about anybody I know doing exactly that. I mean, just focusing on that one stakeholder. And they're at the Container Store is pretty much the same thing. I used to be embarrassed when I would go to events where we were celebrating somebody's 10 or 20 or 30-year employee thing, and their spouses would always say, Kip, you know, Mary's worked for you for 20 years now, and the thing that's so amazing about that is it's made her so much happier. It's made her a better mom. It's made her, you know, a better wife. And I used to get very embarrassed when they said that. I said, oh my God, you know, don't say that. But then I realized that's the whole point. It does really completely transform these people's lives. It makes them feel so much better about themselves because we spend so much, I mean, we spend more waking hours at work than anything else. And so, and our self-worth is so wrapped up in what we do for a living that if we're lifted up rather than beaten down at work, we treat the person at the 7-Eleven on the way home entirely differently. You know, we go home and we treat our families differently. We treat the golden retriever differently. So, I mean, we can make a better world kind of one fulfilled employee at a time, one conscious capitalist type company at a time. And that's what a lot of people are working on, and more people are working on. That led at the Container Store for us to really focus on putting the employee first. We're harmonizing the needs of all the stakeholders, but we actually put the employee first, even before the customer. That led to Fortune magazine deciding that we were the best company to work for in America 2 years in a row, which was great. Made it real easy to recruit when you move into a new city, you know. We were number 1 twice, we were number 2 twice. That'll let you stay at the top forever, but we've been on the list for 19 years. Simon Sinek says customers will never love a company until the employees love it first. I think about that sometimes when I'm flying various airlines. But it's still clear we have work to do. I mean, a stat that all of you know is in 2016, Harvard said 51% of young adults between 18 and 29 don't support capitalism. Okay. 2017, Oxfam report said 8 men own the same wealth as half of humanity. So that's not sustainable. But I'm filled with hope because of organizations and movements like Conscious Capitalism, which I've been a part of since it started a little over 15 years ago. John Mackey, who's kind of Well, he's the Whole Foods founder, you know, John Mackey. He was actually my college roommate at the University of Texas. And what's weird is after school, he went off and started Whole Foods, and I went off and started the Container Store. We didn't really talk about retail. That's not what we talked about. But we were both into philosophy and ethics and young idealistic, you know, students. And we went off and started businesses that were really built on those ideals. And as much as the work that we put into building those businesses, we devoted ourselves to building the conscious capitalism really movement. And I'm proud to be co-chair of Conscious Capitalism, and we think that we're elevating humanity through business. Nonprofit's very important. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Business is so much bigger than nonprofit that it's what happens in business that really matters. People are so wrapped up in their work that it's business that really matters. So I really think the straight line between where we are as a world and a society and where we want to be as a world and society is through business. And that's why the conscious capitalism work that we do, I think, is so important. We have Alexander McCoben, the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, with us here today. Are you supposed to be here, Alexander? You here? There he is right there. Good work. Good job. Thank you. There's 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. Conscious leadership. And I can tell you as a CEO, CEOs are overrated generally. But when it comes to culture, or when it comes to building a conscious capitalist or stakeholder model company, they're actually underrated. They have to completely buy in, or the company has really no chance of ever achieving much of it. The person at the top really has to buy in. The second tenet of conscious capitalism is stakeholder orientation, a conscious culture, and a higher purpose. You know, a higher purpose other than just making money. I also serve on the board and executive committee of an organization called Just Capital, which is based here in New York. How many of you know about Just Capital? Great, good. Just has all this data, and they're also not just helping you invest more consciously, but they're helping CEOs and management teams practice stakeholder capitalism better by understanding where they're deficient, you know, against their peers, by utilizing all that data, and it's so valuable. CEOs don't really know that X% of their employees can't come up with a $400 emergency thing or living in their cars. They don't think that any of their employees are really doing that. You know, I can tell you, but I mean, the testing and the data that Just provides. I retired as chairman, a short while back, and I got off of every board I possibly could except for Conscious Capitalism and Just. And it's because I think they help investors and business leaders lead us towards a more stakeholder model economy. So I hope you'll look into those 2 organizations, and I hope you'll believe me when I tell you and put some time into it. They can help your investments, they can help your organization, they can help your school or whatever to practice stakeholder capitalism better, and they're also filled with an awful lot of information about helping your leaders with a servant leadership approach to business, which I think is prerequisite to either one. The problem with all the progress that we're making is Jim Sinegal. You know, I'm a retailer. Jim Sinegal is a big hero of mine and something of a mentor, and he taught me that every great company 3 times a decade has a stock fall more than 50%. And I didn't believe him, but over the years I've really talked to a lot of people about that, and guess what? About 3 times a decade, every great company has a stock fall 50%. Amazon had it happen 6 or 7 times. They fell 90% one time. And when that happens, you get a immediate stop to all the progress that the organization has made in practicing sort of a stakeholder orientation, and they go back to a really strident form of shareholder supremacy. The board members are paralyzed by their fear and total lack of understanding of securities law, and they think they're somehow liable unless they do what the activist investor is kind of corralling them to do. John Mackey at Whole Foods could talk to you forever about this. I mean, activist investing kind of led a very, very conscious company to lose its independence. It's now, it's now under Amazon, and that could have been somebody other than Amazon. It was an activist investor loss of independence that was not anticipated or planned for, and frankly, I was on the board for 10 years. There wasn't much the board could do about it either, and. Paul Pullman at Unilever, there's nobody more powerful or more celebrated or with a better financial track record than Unilever, and look at the problems that he had. So culture, powerful CEOs, the things that I used to think would insulate you from this don't insulate you anymore. One of the most eloquent speakers on this stuff is Ron Shaich of Panera Bread. His track record financially for Panera Bread was better than anybody I know, but it kind of forced them into going private to sort of avoid the activist investor short-termism that he felt so would change the culture. I mean, there's a reason why we have, that is the reason why we have half as many public companies today as we did. Actually, it's less than 25 years ago. That halving has happened in about 25 years. If you and I started a farm, which I've been thinking about doing, and all we cared about is, I really like to garden. I should have been Chauncey Gardner, that movie, and being there. I mean, I would love that. I would be so happy doing that. But if we had a farm and we only cared about production for this quarter and this year, our farm wouldn't be very good in as low as 5 years. And that applies pretty universally to any entity you're working on. Who's the senator from Virginia? Mark Warner always tells everybody that everyone used to hold a share of stock for, in the 60s it was 8 years, the average, and now it's 4 months. And Mark's a big conscious capitalist. And so is Joe Biden. So are a lot of Republicans. This tipping point is really exciting because in Texas I can see both sides of the political spectrum really embracing this. Jamie Dimon, I've been lucky enough to spend a good bit of time with him. He's leading the Business Roundtable to their recent statement. Who would think J.P. Morgan would be moving in the direction of stakeholder capitalism? I mean, really, 10 years ago, think about that. Randall Stevenson lives in Dallas. I live in Dallas. I know Randall. He's pretty much a servant leader. I mean, they're moving in that direction. You wouldn't believe the progress that the very companies that 10 years ago, or when we started conscious capitalism 16 years ago or so, we thought would just be hopeless. We really are moving towards a tipping point. I don't, however, think that we're making quite as much progress with investors, except, of course, all of you in this room. And I guess that's why we're having events like this and why I'm so happy that we're having events like this. And I think the reason is because not you, but most investors that I deal with, and I'm pretty much an investor these days, so I deal with a lot of them. That's who I've been meeting with most of the time in New York. But most people don't really believe that investing in a stakeholder model company or that methodology will bring you a better return. You've been talking about it today, Arnaud. I tell you, it will bring you a better return. I believe in my heart and soul that if all you want to do is make more money quickly, that methodology is better than anything else. Sharon, my wife, who is our chief merchant and president for many years, and she's now retired too. Hey, if you think just married's cool, just retired's the best. It's just really fabulous. We are just loving it. And when we started the business in 1978, we made $700 a month each for a long time, and we saved half of it, 50% of it. And the reason that we could do that, because we were so excited to be able to invest in what we considered to be good companies. And in those days, that meant Southwest Airlines. I loved Herb Kelleher. Southwest Airlines versus American Airlines. Sorry to name names, but I'm going to do it. Costco versus Sam's Wholesale. You know, Costco does the same thing as Sam's. Costco's winning that battle, you notice, and they pay their people about 90%, almost double, what Costco does. Whole Foods versus Safeway. And first of all, if you save half your income for 40 years, you'll make a lot of money. But if you invest it that way, you really will make a lot of money. And even though until the recent changes that have gone on in retail, the Container Store has been the best investment you can possibly imagine, we wound up making more money investing in those types of companies and saving half our income than we did with even the fabulous investment that was the Container Store. So that taught me that this is fun, it feels good, and it makes you more money than any way of doing investing. And as adamant as I am about teaching young entrepreneurs how to build stakeholder model type companies, I might be even more excited about trying to help people prove to the world that this type of investing is better for the investor in terms of financial return than the shareholder supremacy model. I mean, I know you've been talking about it some today, and I wasn't able to make all those things, but how many of you actually think that it is a superior form of capitalism, pure and simple, and your returns are better if you kind of focus on that type of company? Am I the only one? No? Tom Gardner, the Motley Fool guy, is a very good friend, and he and I say, if you don't have much time, just look for a founder-led company where the employee turnover is really, really low, and that's probably a pretty good investment right there. That's probably a pretty good company, right there. In fact, Tom Gardner and Ed Freeman, the kind of rock star ethics professor at Darden, and I we're in the process of writing a book called Why the Stakeholder Model is Always Your Best Investment Guide, always. The stakeholder model really is always your best investment guide. But I think to change minds on the fact, because you think about the family office where the person's saying, well, it's probably only a 3 or 4% return, but you're doing a lot of good things for the people of Western Tennessee or whatever. Do we think that mentality is migrating away from that? And that you saw how many hands went up? I mean, I hope so. I'm very dedicated to trying to get more people, one of the greatest stories in the history of humanity is if this kinder, gentler, more humane way of practicing economics is absolutely more successful than investing in the other methodologies. If we can somehow prove that, if we can somehow illustrate that with more data, because there's still lots of doubt about it, and the data is not really concrete, well, then nobody would invest in the other methodologies. And if we can have more organizations like Just Capital, Great Place to Work, even Glassdoor, then we have more confidence on the part of investors and employees and business leaders in building that type of thing. Is Martin Whitaker here? Yes, sir. There's Martin. Martin's the CEO of Just Capital, and I would encourage you to do all you can to research Just Capital and conscious capitalism, and that information can help you and your leaders do an even better job. I know so many of you do such a great job, but do an even better job moving towards stakeholder capitalism and helping others to do it as well. You know what's funny? When Sharon and I retired, I also stopped speaking for about a year, and because we're just doing what we want. And so I'm still working on conscious capitalism and everything, but I said, I'm going to take a year off of speaking, and this is one of the first one. In fact, this is the first one I've done in about a year. And I can kind of tell. Can you tell? I mean, my pages are out of sequence. I'm looking down a lot. I mean, I'm as passionate as I've ever been about this stuff, but I'm going, good Lord, Kip, come on, give it, I'm gonna need a thing or something here the next time. So, but the good news is we're almost finished, and then we'll take some questions. The straight line between where we are and a better world is to improve the world of business. Conscious capitalism, Alexander McCoben. The Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, Lady Lynn Rothschild. All the information in the world there for you. I would encourage you so much to support and help and research about that. The more you learn about these organizations, the more you'll see ways that they can help you. Just Capital, Martin Whitaker. Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, CECP, started by Paul Newman. Can you believe that he started that organization? It's so amazing. Darrell Brewster, goes with Darrell. yesterday. B Lab, which does the B Corp certification, you can learn so much from them. J. Cone Gilbert's one of the brightest guys in America that runs that. B Team, the B Team, Hala Thomasdottir, Icelandic, Thomasdottir, I wonder what that means, is a Richard Branson organization. Those 6 organizations are coming together to form something called Imperative 21 that these two guys and I are very involved with, because one of the things I've realized is that Mackie and I can run around and try to talk about conscious capitalism. Martin can talk about just capital forever. But if you study civil rights movement and that type of thing, once the various organizations that are all advocating kind of the same thing come together and unite, that's when you start getting global scaling progress. And so I'm pleased to announce, I'm not really supposed to announce it, but there's a thing called Imperative 21 that's coming, where those 6 organizations come together and do exactly that. And then we start looking for who else wants to join us. And primarily, we're simply trying to move from a stakeholder supremacy model for our economy globally to exactly what we're talking about here. So I hope you will learn more about those organizations and see how they can help you. They're all fairly small, we're making progress in working with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation to recognize the work that we're doing, and so maybe they won't stay as small for long. But I really believe that we build a better world, one fulfilled, productive employee who looks forward to getting out of bed and going to work in the morning and treats the golden retriever better as a result. One conscious capitalist company at a time. I really worry that I shouldn't spend so much time with these young entrepreneurs teaching them servant leadership or conscious capitalism, but a lot of those companies are going to grow to be really large companies. And I mean, it's very satisfying work. And now my even bigger focus is probably one sustainable investor at a time. So thank you for my disorganized but heartfelt speech, and I really enjoy being able to do it. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Kip, I really appreciate your form of servant leadership. I call it stewardship, basically,
Yes.
kind of thing. And by the way, that friend of yours, Jamie, 10 years ago, he's not a billionaire, so he may have a little different opinion now that he's not. But I want to take you back to 1970, since you used that as a marker.
Because people love him, though.
Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
One of the things that's different now, shareholder versus stakeholder, is the role of private equity and LBO people in disintermediating the business world. Can you comment about that?
Well, I mean, private equity, even if the people are very good people, there's a flaw in the business model in that they have to sell at a certain point in time. And at that time, at that harvest time, frankly, these even when they're good people, it's almost impossible for their interest to not become misaligned to all the other stakeholders, including the middle term and long term shareholder. That sort of sums it up, There's so many more now. I think it has a lot to do with, there's less investment in machinery and people. There's less of that. That gets in the way of productivity increase. But when my original partner began to retire, I interviewed over 100 private equity firms, and we wound up with Leonard Green, and we had a great marriage for a long time. But as it became more harvest time, that becomes more difficult. So that's just the nature of the game there. I've spent a lot of time trying to teach certain private equity firms how to become conscious capitalist private equity firms, which is a hysterical oxymoron, of course. But there's one private equity firm that's a B Corp. So we're making progress on all that. Yes, ma'am.
And last one.
Thank you. Even though it's been a year since you gave a speech, I thought it was awesome. My name is Esma. I'm on the Sustainable and Impact Investing team at Glenmead. I'm really curious to know, as you spoke about such a strong a workplace and culture and environment at the Container Store. In your time leading the company, how have you thought about closing the gender pay gap and the racial pay gap and increasing transparency among your employees around that?
I mean, you have to test it. I mean, most people, most CEOs I know are really kind of live in a fantasy land about that. So it's becoming more and more common that people test it, and that which gets tested gets done. I mean, nobody that starts to recognize the problem is not going to start, closing the gap. Am I answering the question properly? We just lived in this kind of ego-filled bliss ignorance that we thought. I mean, we had 17 of the top 21 positions in our company were women, but we still had a gap. We didn't know that until we found out. Once you find out, it's impossible not to fix that. Does that answer it? A little bit?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.